Okay, we're going to start presentations on Webform. There's this for that. So, some background information about me. My name is Jrockowitz. I'm known as jrockowitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect, and I built and maintain the Webform module for Drupal 8. And this slide's kind of for me. This presentation is just not about like the history of the Webform module, installing it, alternatives to. I'm not going to go much into the future roadmap. Not heavily into theming, or really managing submissions. I really want to focus on, this is about building awesome forms. And how do you build forms in Drupal? Well, there's the Webform module for that. And the Webform module is a powerful and flexible open source form builder and submission manager for Drupal 8. And this is kind of my elevator pitch. It provides all the features expected from a proprietary enterprise form builder, combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. And just to kind of lay out the landscape, this is a simple form. It's a contact form built using the Webform module. This is the back-end admin UI for building the form. And there's a feature in the Webform module for Drupal 8 where you can edit the source. And that's just the YAML representation of the form we were just looking at. And finally, you do collect a submission, and this is the submission generated from when that form is submitted. And it all comes down to, I just want to walk through the use case. And the use case for the Webform module is what really you're collecting data. So you're building a form, you can copy a template, you're going to publish that form on your site as a page, note, or blog. Then you're going to collect submissions from that form, and when those submissions come in, you're going to send out confirmations and notifications, traditionally email. You're going to review those results online, just browse through them, and then you're going to distribute them. Typically in D7, you'd pull them down into a CSV, but you can also remote post that data to an external server, like a CRM. And it really comes down to these three things. You're building a form, you're collecting the data, and you're distributing the data. And the elevator pitch, I'll start with this clean install, and we're going to just look at the contact form that I showed you in the demo. What I like to do is just show you adding a company element. So I'm going to go into a text field. I'm going to just type, here it's already filled out, company. I'm not going to do any of the other settings, and just adding it. I'll show you the form. And there's a little bit of a mistake here where it should say your company should be at the top of the form. So we can go back into build, and you can easily check off required, hit submit. But I want to show you just the YAML mode. So you can edit the source, and there's the element. It just shows you exactly how things are laid out. I'm just going to show you how to move it up. Change it to your company. And let's say I wanted to make this required. And I like showing you cut and paste because it just shows you the power of this. And one of the most powerful features of this YAML source mode is you can edit all the labels at once. You can like look at the whole form, tweak it, make adjustments. And if you actually know Form API, you can just write the form like this, which I tend to do. I'm going to hit save. We're going to jump over. I'm going to actually go to the test tab. So what the test tab does is just fills out your form with just reasonable defaults that you actually can control in the administrative interface, but for now it's just some Latin text. I'm going to hit send, and it will have sent an email and gives a little confirmation message. And this is the only time I'm really going to show you the results coming in. So you go over to the results tab, and you get to view the results as they're coming in. You can customize them and pick which columns. You can flag, you can lock a submission, especially if you're doing an application process where you don't want anyone to edit it. You can have it locked. And you can also add some notes and additional information. And of course, you can view the submission. There's a table view, which is very useful if you have massively long forms, like 100 elements. I got to scroll down to show it to you. That makes it very easy to read through the data and see what's going on. You can also, and this is where I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you can also resend the emails. This is a great way to preview your emails before they go out if you're trying to tweak the templates. So I'm going to back up to the form and kind of just give you a hint of the flexibility that you have with laying out a form. So we've got this form. There's support for Flexbox layouts, which is a CSS 3 standard to basically do multi-column layouts. And what I'm going to do is add a Flexbox. I'm going to bring it up. And what I want to do is just put your company and your name next to each other. Hit save. And then I want to add one element below it just to make it start to look pretty. Keep in mind I'm using Bartik, so it's not the most pretty way to do things. So I'm adding a horizontal rule, and these are predefined styles that you can customize all these styles. They're just classes being added to an HR. But let's say I want to make it dotted, and I want to make it nice and big, really, to show you what you're going to get. I'm going to hit save. Oh, I made one mistake, and I want to make it look pretty, so I'll move it up here. But I think you start getting the idea that you can nest all these little elements together and basically build out any wireframe that you're given for a form. So to continue forward, there's a lot going on here, and it's, how do you discover what the Webform module can do? And there are examples for that. And the Webform module provides examples and demos that can be used as a starting point for building forms and applications. And there are examples and demos of every type of element. There's an example of a multi-step form, examples of some conditional logic, how you'd set that up. There's also just examples of Flexbox layouts, just to give you an idea of how it's working, how you can arrange things. And then below, there's these demos of kind of combining multiple forms and blocks to create applications. And there's a demo of an event registration system, which I'll continually reference through the presentation. That's where you have an event and you attach a registration form, and someone fills out the form and you're getting a registrant. An application evaluation is kind of a similar workflow where someone fills out an application and then you have users come in to evaluate that application. An example would be like a college application. And one of the most important examples is there's a style guide that shows you kitchen sink of every element, and your designers can go in and get a sense of the look and feel as they're building out the theme, see how things they need to modify, and I can quickly show you that one example. And it's comprehensive. Once upon a time was called the kitchen sink, and I decided to call it a style guide because it's a little more accurate, but it is everything. So it shows you the progress bar, it shows you the optional indicates required field, and then it shows you the basic elements. I'm going to scroll a little faster so you can get through. You get your date elements, all your variations. And this just helps you know what your options are. Telephone, and then we start getting into, there are a lot of JavaScript enhancements for all the widgets. So the example would be there's an international telephone where you can have people select their country. You get into these HTML5 elements. And table select is something in core, but people aren't using it that heavily, but it's available. And then you get into these little cute kittens, which is just image selection. There's a ratings element. The signature element's been used heavily by certain applications. And then we start getting into, there's full support for entity references and variations of that, where you can have a drop-down, checkboxes, and radios. There is a concept called composites, which I'll get into. The simple way to describe it is, it's like an address element, a bunch of elements working together. And location, just quickly, Google Maps, autocomplete. And this section is just form elements, how they lay out. It's very important that you let your designers look at this and see how required is going to look, how the tooltips are going to look. There's even inline tooltips using jQuery UI. And even those horizontal rules are listed here. And you should go in and modify this once you have a theme to kind of customize it to address your design requirements. And there's examples of inline messages and how they'll look. And finally, a Flexbox. I'm going to keep going. So how do you start building forms? There are templates for that. And templates are forms that can be copied to create new forms. And templates are just reusable forms. Create a form and check a box and say, I want a template. And it's very important when you use a template, it's a copy. It's a duplicate of that form. And once it's copied, changing the template or deleting it doesn't change the existing form. Once you make that copy, it goes off and it's in its own space. And so this is the example of a feedback template that ships with the Webform module. I can really just demo it to you. Go up to the top. And these are all modules. So you turn on the Webform templates module and you get these default templates that you can kind of decide if you want to use them. You can delete them. You can customize them. I do want to show you the preview so you see what we're getting. Oh, sorry. This is the same thing as that contact form. It just has these 4 options at the beginning. And I'm going to use it a little further, so I'm going to just select it. I'm going to create it. And now we have our feedback. So how do you build awesome forms? Well, there are elements for that. And a form is a collection of elements. And these elements include inputs, composites, containers, and pages when you're building a multi-step form that are used to collect a submission. And this is like the anatomy of a form, but it's kind of important to emphasize this is kind of the anatomy of a page in Drupal, is everything's an element. On a site, the header's an element. Blocks are elements, so to speak. And then you get into an input, which is an element that collects a value, and composites are just a group of inputs working together to collect a group of values, like an address. And containers are just, they hold elements, and the classic example would be a field set. HTML5 has support for a section element. And pages are containers, but I want to call them out because it contains a bunch of elements that are displayed in a multi-step form. They become individual pages in that process. And there are just many different types of elements that you can choose from. This is trying to show you some of the categorization. And just the anatomy of a form element, kind of how there's a lot of options there. So it's important to start to think about how they're broken down. You have the definition of the element, where you're just describing the name of it, the cardinality, whether it's a multiple value element, maybe how many values, the default value. There's a lot of control over labeling, so you can set the title, description, help text, and even more. And then when you get down to the input for text fields, you can do things like add prefixes and suffixes like dollar symbols, control the size. You also get support for input mask. So if you want to collect, off the top of my head, a social security number, you can put an input mask for that. And then validation, there's a lot of variations of validation. Classic required, but you can also require something to be unique. You can do regular expression patterns and counters for text fields based on word count or character count. And there is full support for conditional logic, which would mean just conditionally hiding and showing elements based on another value, or setting something to be required or disabled. And then you do get full access controls over every element. That just means you can decide which element's visible to which user. It's very useful if you have a form come in and you want administrators to edit certain fields after that form's come through. And then there's an advanced tab where you can kind of manipulate the attributes and settings around every aspect of the element. When I say attributes, you can inject custom data attributes for Google tracking would be the example. And this is the UI. Right now, this is, by the way, you have control over this in the admin stuff. I'm not spending a lot of time, but this is done in a dialog, but right now I've switched over to using the sidebar, and you can go into the admin and decide how you want your element settings forms to be displayed. And this is just the conditional logic. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but it just shows you how you can break it down and add multiple conditions. And advanced settings, this is a good example where you can go in and specify custom classes into an element, custom styles, and custom attributes. That means those are HTML attributes that get rendered. The best example would be data attributes that you might want to use for tracking. And just the types of inputs, I think people are familiar with forms. You got simple text inputs. Options is just this idea like drop-down menus. It's a set of options. Checkboxes and radios fall into that. Even the image, the cute kittens, I consider kind of options. And then there's support for file uploads. But they are broken down into media types. The benefit, the example would be a video file upload. When you're on a mobile device and you click upload, it'll actually open a recorder on a phone. With the widgets, I'm just kind of classifying. There's these ratings, signature elements, little toggle buttons, and entity references, which if you want to reference content on your site. So, with containers, sometimes you can use basic divs. I should highlight that's really useful if you're doing conditional logic, because you can put a bunch of elements into a div and then set all the conditional logic around that container. Sections is just kind of getting headers and groupings. Field set and details, I think people are familiar with. And then Flexbox is also a container. Now we're getting into composites. So one of the more classic composites is a Likert element, where you're doing a survey and someone's asking them 10 questions and rating on a scale of 1 to 10 how they feel, etc. Those are called Likerts. And then you also get just location, address, and contact, and they're kind of similar. But for example, the contact composite extends the address to get the person's name and email address. And there's support for links and URLs, so you can get a title and URL combined together, names. And there's support for custom composites. The example would be, I like using, if you're doing a registration form for a hotel and you need a custom composite where you're getting someone's name, their age, their preferences, you can build an element for that. And don't forget, you can preview all these elements in the UI. I'm going to show it to you. Quick demo. I'll use this form. So you can go over to Add Elements, and this is comprehensive and has some filtering, but you can click Show Preview and get a quick glance of all the elements. And if you lose track, where's the signature element, you could use that. I'm still going to stick to the text element. You really should spend time and go through all these elements and get familiar with them. But what I want to do with the text element, and it's really just going to call it text field, you've got to spend some time and experiment with things. And I'm just doing this to show you all the variations of help text as one of them. And I don't think, by the way, you should fill out all these labels on your elements, but I'm doing it to illustrate that you have a lot of possibilities. So what you're getting is the help text will create a little help bubble. The description just goes right below the element, and then the more gives you a slide out. And it just depends on the forms you're building. I can really break these down. Like, I use this help icon extensively in the Webform module because my feeling is that most people don't really need to see this text. Only when they start or get confused, they roll over the help, they get the information, and they move on. Description is always helpful if you really need a description. And I've worked on some clinical applications where these descriptions just get completely out of hand, where we're describing, like, for cancers, it's like PSA results, and it's literally almost a page of text that you have to have there. And the more has been extremely useful to have the information available, but not clutter the page. I'm going to delete this element so it doesn't mess me up. It also just shows you the delete dialog. And there's a duplicate. Okay, keep going. So we built forms, and once you have a form, well, how do you send emails and push data to a CRM? Because I think that's really becoming a much more common use case. And there's a handler for that. And handlers are used to route submitted data to applications and send email notifications. And the use cases for handlers, email notifications and confirmations has got to be the most common one. You can do SMS notifications as well. And you can push that data. You can remote post data to, like, Salesforce. I do that for a lot of the apps I work on. Another classic one is there's actually a Webform MailChimp module that you can select the MailChimp handler and subscribe someone to a mailing list. There are also two handlers to allow you to, like, conditionally flag a submission based on submitted values. You saw there was that flag property, and you can set up a handler and say, well, if this person enters this value, flag the submission. You can also use handlers to conditionally change some of the behaviors of a web form. The classic one would be changing the confirmation message based on fields they filled out. Like, we're looking at the feedback form. If someone says, I'm giving feedback on a bug, you might want to say, we'll get back to you in 24 hours. If someone says, I'm giving you feedback on the site, you might say 48 hours. And this is the breakdown of the handlers. There's an email handler. There's also a scheduled email handler, and this is where I'm starting to get into this event registration system. It's really designed for event registrations because what it does is someone fills out and says, I want to sign up for an event, and the scheduled email handler allows you to take that sign up and say, a day before the event, send this person an email, and you're kind of setting up a queue to send out that notification. You can also use the scheduled email handler because you can save drafts. If someone saves a draft and doesn't do anything with that draft, you can send them a reminder in 2 weeks to, that they have a draft for an application that they haven't filled out. A remote post, I'm going to demo. It's just about pushing data. The actions and settings is all that stuff between triggering different behaviors. The way to describe it is an action triggers a behavior on a submission where you could flag a submission, add a note to a submission. You can even lock a submission, which is really useful if you're doing an application review process. You have a drop down, someone says this is completed, you can just lock it. Settings is this idea of altering the settings behind the web form, like a confirmation message, where you can alter any aspect of that web form. And finally, there's a debug handler if you need to see the data. I have the handler, but every one of these handlers I described has a little debug button. So I recommend checking that off when you're doing development because you see what's going on in the background. And I'll just show you the email handler. So we go over to settings. There's a confirmation and a notification. What I want to do is I'm going to jump to the notification because there's a little nuance here that it also supports conditional routing based on select menu options or radios. So in this case, I'm just using site mail, but you can have, if someone says, I'm giving feedback or comment on the site, you can send it to comments@example.com. I think I even have that filled out. And it even takes into account if someone enters other, you can send it to a general inbox. One thing to just walk through is every single aspect of an email going out, you have control over. Like, we're just talking CCC, BCC, but in the advanced tab, you can control the reply to the headers if you're dealing with certain spam issues. I'm not going to go heavily into this, but there is support for Twig in these templates, so you can kind of build your own custom templates, and keep in mind it's Drupal. You can go right into the theme layer and start altering it. There's conditional logic for emails, so that routing is really useful, but sometimes you need to send different types of messages, so you might set up conditions for that. Advanced, once again, I want to emphasize just this idea, well, just this one's a nuance where you're sending an email when a form's completed, but let's say someone saves a draft and you want to send them a reminder, you can actually control when this email is going out in the workflow of the form. And this is all those custom headers and that debug tab. What I really want to show you is the remote post. So we're going to go over, and I'm actually going to use the broken URL. So you can send this data when the form's completed, if it's updated, or even when it's deleted. You can also set what data goes to the remote post handler. By default, I'm sending only the elements that you're defining and not all the metadata around the form, because I felt like that was a little bit overkill. There's been a recent change where if you had a file upload, it'll actually send the file in, I think, base64 encoding, so your CRM can pull that file in. What's really important, and once again, remote post can be conditional, but what I want to emphasize, you can control the remote post and say whether you're posting the data or using a get, JSON. You can also append custom data, so you can add API keys. That's one way. Sometimes you need to add API keys to the post. It also gets into this is a very tricky one, it gets into adding keys to the header using Guzzle, so you can add API keys to the header. It really depends on your endpoint. For developers in the room, it's a plugin. You can extend it and add, for example, your own OAuth authentication method. You can add some custom messages. What I really have to check off here is debugging, because I just sent it to this isn't going to work, which is kind of the point. I'm going to go over to test, and then hit submit. It's going to fail. This is what the debugger does, is it shows you, oh,
it does that.
That's really cool. It's kind of remarkable that the error triggered the screen to go crazy.
You're trailing parentheses.
In parentheses.
What?
The parenthesis at the end.
Of the
URL.
Oh, well, it would have failed anyway, so we're good. We're good either way. And you know what? Did it go through? Yeah, it did. It went to CloudFront anyway. So Guzzle was like, I don't care about parentheses.
Okay.
But what I do like, we know we get errors. What's just nice to point out is the data is really simple that you're dealing with Webform submission. It is a associative array. It's flat. You have multiple values. Well, it's a multiple, it's very simple to see the data, understand it, and manipulate it. So I hope that got recorded, by the way. Okay, so we're going to get into just how do you tweak and adjust the behavior or look and feel of a web form? Well, there are settings for that. And so this is more a really important statement is the web form module ships with reasonable default settings, but everything is customizable. I say that to emphasize you don't have to go in and start tweaking everything. You can build a form, get it working, and you'll probably be fine. Do you really need to customize the exception message that'll happen some random point? Probably not. But you need to know that it's there. And this is just the layout of all the settings. And I spent a lot of time trying to make this work where it's sensible, where you have your general information. That's where you might say a form's a template, or you're going to disable the saving of results. You can control how the form's going to look, how it's going to behave, the messages, your submission. That kind of is the workflow. Once someone hits submit, you're going to get a confirmation page. You can control that. Emails and handlers we just talked about. And the last two are just you can inject custom CSS and JavaScript into the form. The CSS is really helpful because sometimes you have little margin issues with your design where you can just go in and tweak a little tiny class and move it around. The JavaScript, if conditional logic doesn't meet your needs, you can add a little extra JavaScript to fix some things. And access controls, once again, so you can set up full access controls to the form and decide who can access this form, when and how, who can even test the form. And yeah, this is kind of the walkthrough. You can disable saving results, set up custom templates, URL alias. You can also Ajaxify a form, which just means it'll work through Ajax, which is a checkbox. And if you do add third-party settings, spam protection being probably the one thing you must, and I'm going to bring up spam at least 3 times. This is where you might configure your anti-bot spam configurations. With the form settings and behaviors, you can set open and close dates. That's very useful for event registration. Customize every label. You can also decide whether your form can be pre-populated using query string parameters. You can tweak the multi-step process. You can also enable a preview page. With submissions, once again, all the labels and messages around submissions. So when someone saves a draft, what's the message going to be displayed? You can also set submission limits. So how many times the form can be submitted generally, how many times a user can submit it, and even a source entity, which I'm going to get into and explain a little bit more. You can enable the savings of drafts. You are able to save anonymous drafts. If you do that, you must enable submission purging, or your database is going to just fill up with information. What that means is you're scheduling, if a draft gets to be more than 6 months old, it'll automatically get deleted. There's also a little autofill feature where you can, if someone comes back to a form, it'll autofill it with previous data, but you can select what data. So it's like their general contact information, maybe for an event registration form, but not the registration details. Confirmation, just every possible type of confirmation that you could think of for a form is supported. So you can have a dedicated page, you can display a status message, you can even have a modal dialog pop up, especially if you're using an AJAX form where it's tucked in a block. That's kind of the cleanest way to do it. And you can redirect to internal and external URLs. And with the custom JavaScript, I kind of pointed this out, is you can set font type sizes, tweaks. Access controls, this is kind of breaking it down. It's like you can decide who views their own, like view own, view all, update all, delete own, delete all, administer the whole web form and submissions, and you can also say who can go get to that test tab. And there's not much I want to demo with it, but I'm going to go back and just kind of walk you through. I'll do one thing which I think is really just helps give you a hint. So I'm going to go to form, and I just want this form to, once again, every element has the ability to add custom attributes. And for this purpose, I just want to make this feedback message stand out. I'm going to wrap it in a status container. And this isn't that pretty, but it just, because we're using Bardic, this just is the most simplest container to access, and it just wraps it in a little green box. But imagine if you were using Bootstrap and you've extended Bootstrap and you have your panels and your widgets, you can start getting some really complex design patterns going. Okay. Yeah, coming back to this. Should you customize everything? Should you customize nothing? It's really important to know what's possible and impossible. You've got to walk through all the settings, see what's going on, get familiar with it, but keep it simple. You don't have to go crazy. For developers, I think it's really important. There's a lot of settings, and if you're doing a large rollout, you should keep in mind that you can apply default settings using code. In Hook Web Form Create, you can say what the default behavior of all your web forms are. You can add handlers to them, for example, setting a default email address. And templates are also really useful for defining defaults. Your site builders can go in and say, here's my default contact form, and it's already got all the handlers wired for them with the proper settings and headers and things like that. So we've only talked about the web form settings, but how can you change the global default settings? There's a little nuance in the web form module where the web form has settings, and when you get to the global behaviors, that's called configuration. And that kind of comes from Drupal because they generally call things configuration. And configuration defines the default features, functionality, behaviors available to all web forms. So if you really want to disable client-side validation for all your forms, you can go into configuration and check a box and it goes away. This is a slide that's really important because this is stuff you should always configure. If you're doing file uploads, you have to turn on private file access. I even include the PSA to explain why it's important. If you don't have private file access and you just allow anyone to upload files, they'll use your site for spam. They'll post files on it. Spam protection is also really important to go through and decide what spam protection modules you're going to use. And similar to file uploads, there's a ton of elements. I don't think any site I've ever seen uses, I think it's like 84 elements, has used the 84 elements. You should look at the list and turn off the ones you don't need. If you're not doing file uploads, turn off the element. Don't make it available to your site builders. It's just easier. API key is kind of a given. If you're doing that location element, you need the API key. And reusable options, that's the part I want to demo. It's just like you can define what countries you want to support in your drop-down menus. And there's a whole bunch of different demographic options. You should look at them and decide how you want to work with them. And once again, this has a breakdown. It follows a lot of patterns that we're familiar with. Forms, elements, contain options, submissions, handlers. Exporters are the plugins used to download a CSV, to generate that CSV. And you can turn on and off. There's only 4 types of exporters. It's like a CSV generator, a table generator. You can export as YAML and JSON. And I turn off the YAML and JSON on most sites because they're not really needing that type of data. Libraries. I'll demo it, but there's a lot of external libraries required by the Webform module, but you can pick and choose them. There's about 13, and you can turn them all off. The example that I like to give is there's support for select to and chosen, and what those do is make multiple select drop-down menus not suck. And the thing is, you only want to use one or the other, and they just make them more usable. In core, people are leaning towards select to. There's no final decision on that, so I've decided to make both available. And advanced is where you can just control all the like little nuances like your test data. You can even turn on and off different behaviors. There's some promotions and messaging. You can turn those on and off. You can turn off the about section. I'm just going to demo elements, options, and libraries. And the elements is pretty simple because we go over to configuration. And this is where you can define how your HTML editor works, what tags are supported. When I've shown you those attributes and those classes, you have full control over those lists of classes. So you can go in and put your bootstraps. I keep bringing up bootstrap, your bootstrap-specific classes, whatever your designer wants to go with. What I really think you have to do is come down here and open this up and get a look at all the elements that are available. It's a lot, and there's one example here that there's 2 elements that are turned off by default. The password element's off by default because web form submissions are stored as plain text. You don't want to show someone a password field that stores the data as plain text. At the same time, we wanted to add support for this because if you're doing CRM integration and you're passing that data over an encrypted line, it's fine. And there's even a message here when you turn it on and off. And it's also available so that if a module, I haven't talked to the Webform encryption maintainers, but they can turn on the password element now because they're supporting encryption. So go through this list. You can remove a bunch. Options. So this is all the demographic stuff for days of the week, months. Delete them if you don't need these. The examples, even ethnicity, you can edit, and I'll use that one for. It's also showing you where it's used. These are used heavily in the examples right now, but when you start making changes, you'll know how it'll affect your site. I'm going to go to ethnicity. Just a list, name value pairs. They're synchronized. You can decide which ones are used as Likert elements for the scales. What's really important is if you get really long lists, you can go in and edit them as YAML and customize them. There are also hooks in the back end, so you can actually hook into a database to populate some of these options. I'm going to jump up. And finally, with libraries, there's directions here on how to download the libraries. There's drush commands. I basically came up with every option that I could think to make it easier. So you can just type drush webform libraries download, it'll download all the libraries. You can also type a composer command that'll update your composer JSON with the libraries you need. And for people that aren't using composer or drush, you can just download a zipped archive of all the libraries very quickly, and it just helps keep things in sync. And yes, you can add CSS and JavaScript globally. I actually would recommend doing that at the theme layer, but I wanted to make it available. And these are all the libraries included, and that's the example where you can choose between jQuery chosen or select to. I think there's even logic to give you a warning that you shouldn't do both. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so the takeaway here is there's a configuration for that. And what if you can't configure something via the user interface? Well, this is Drupal, and there's a module, hook, or template for that. You can tweak anything you want at any level. That's been my experience. So switch over to, you've got a form, it's collecting data, it's configured. Now, how do you place a web form on your website? There are blocks for that. So web form blocks are blocks that display a web form. It's one of the simplest definitions in this presentation. Web form blocks, it just makes it easy to include a web form within layouts or panels. With blocks, you can place a web form anywhere on a page and anywhere on your site. And this is the UI for adding a web form block. And I'm going to show it to you because there's a nice nuance. Okay, so we're going to go over to block layout. I'm going to place the contact form in the second sidebar. Select contact. And here you can control the context, where the web form is. You can even decide whether you attach a web form to another web form. If you're doing an application evaluation system, you might do that. I'm going to skip all this and just add the block to the site. I'm going to jump to the home page. And now we have our form here. And we have our, we're back to the feedback form. So let's go to the home. So what I'm going to do is fill this form out. Actually, for this demo, I started doing this test tab, where it'll just auto-fill it out. It's a little helper. But I'm going to show you, I'll use it for, I'm going to click through to some other content types. Here, get it. Here, test. What I want to show you is I'm submitting it throughout the site in different areas, so I'm moving around the site, navigating to different pages. I'm going to hit submit one more time. Now I'm going to use this to jump to the results. And what the web form module does is it tracks the context. Where is the web form being submitted from? It's called the source entity. And this was the first submission I did when we were directly on the web form. This is from the home page. But these two are the nodes, and it's tracking the nodes. What it's kind of done is taken this contact form and made it almost like a comment form on your site, because you're knowing where it's coming from. This is a great point to start talking about event registration systems, because if you take a web form and attach it to events, like a registration form, you'll be able to create individual sets of registrations, which I'm going to demo. So keep that concept in the back of your mind. So how do you fully integrate a web form into your website? Well, there are web form nodes for that. And web form nodes are nodes with a web form field entity reference attached. That's the second simplest quote. So you need to turn on the web form node module. It provides a web form content type, but any content type on your website can have a web form attached to it. When you do that, the web form node, once it's set up, basically the relationship, it tracks the submissions, the specific submissions to that node, and it adds a test tab and a results tab. And another added feature is all your web forms on your site get a references tab, and that helps you know which web forms are associated with which nodes. And I just want to emphasize, it's just a field that can be added to any content entity. That includes paragraphs. People are doing that all the time, injecting web forms in the middle of their paragraphs. And just some tips and tricks for web form fields and nodes is tokens are really useful, because you can pass node field values down to your web form using tokens. And this token is an example where you might have a node where you want someone, they're creating that registration form, they've got their event, they're attaching that form, but they want to customize the confirmation message on the registration form when someone hits submit. You can add a field confirmation message to your event node, and then use a token to pass that data through to the web form. Another example that I didn't spend time on is there are computed elements supported in the web form module. So computed elements just mean you can do calculations on the fly, and those elements can display web form node values or grab them or pull them in. And I just showed the screen because there's just a massive amount of tokens. You should spend some time, scroll through them, and see how they're working. You can get to every value, the formatting, really useful for building custom emails. And just to walk through building a web form node. So we'll stick to this. We are on the contact form, and this is the references tab. And I've added no nodes to the site, but it figures out what content types. I have the demo installed, but I'm going to use the web form node. It passes the web form node ID to the URL. It autofills everything because it figures, well, the titles probably should be the same. You can always customize it, but it populates the web form. And when you do this relationship, you can do little nuances. You can set how this web form is going to be when it's open, closed, scheduling. You can also pass default data into the web form. So you might, for example, be passing an event registration ID into that web form submission as it goes through. For this demo, it's just going to turn on. We got our web form. What I want to do is just get rid of this form, because you don't want to have two forms on the same page. It just creates some conflicts. It's not a big one. It's a very uncommon use case. But so we have, this is a web form node. I'm going to jump over the test. Submit it once. Submit it twice. And you're going to see that you're only getting two results, so it's tracking it. And this is exactly the event registration. So think of that node as your event. You have one registration form, and you attach it to your events. And it's all managed in one place. And what's great is when you go to that registration form, you can get a list of all registrations across all events, and it's all tracked. Okay, I'm taking a small break because now we're switching gears. So how can you extend the Webform module? There are add-ons for that. And add-ons are just Drupal modules and projects that extend and provide additional functionality to the Webform module and Drupal's Form API. This is where I get a little technical. It's just to say that the Webform module is extending Drupal's Form API. So any enhancement to Drupal's Form API that's available can be made available to the Webform module. I'll get to one, it's a good example, but there are just a lot of useful add-ons, and there's a dedicated tab where you can kind of scroll through and see the list and what people are doing. And this is just the breakdown when you're in the tab. Spam protection, once again, it just lists out all the available. There's now 4 spam protection ones, like CAPTCHA, Antibot. There's some replacement for Mullum, and I'm blanking on the name. It just kind of started getting written up a few days ago. You can do some validation, extra elements. Integration is where that, like MailChimp module, there's a Salesforce lead generator. Someone did a My Emma integration. There's also stuff if you want to, for example, the Webform module supports HTML email, but it doesn't support file attachments to emails. You have to enable some mail modules, like either you use the SMTP module, or I think it's the mail system, and then you could pick Swift Mail as the handler. There's some REST API modules, configuration. There is a migrate module. I call it out because people need to start helping support it a little bit more. Some stuff with multilingual. There's great stuff with workflow and some development tools. And these are, once again, with the spam, Honeypot and CAPTCHA I'm calling out. Client-side validation is a good one because that's just a Form API enhancement, and it does client-side JavaScript validation using a jQuery library, and it's very pretty. And what I like about it is you turn it on and it just works. There's almost no configuration to it. With improving the site builder experience, I want to emphasize like IMCE. If you're doing anything with cute kittens and having those like image selects, you're going to want to have IMCE because it makes it possible to upload those files and associate them with your form. And there is a Webform views module that allows you to build custom displays of your submissions. Out of the box, it's a very simple table that you can just pick and choose the columns in order, and that's it. If you need advanced filtering, you're going to want to work with the Webform views module. The analysis module, this is also, if you're from D7, these two things were kind of taken out and moved into their own spaces so that other people can go off and do amazing things. Like the analysis module allows you to build charts on who submitted what value, how many people checked yes or no. What I really liked and I saw was you can get those charts into blocks and then build a dashboard so someone could get like an overview of all the data coming into multiple forms. It's really, what's cool about it is he's using the Google Charts API. The code's really simple, but the power is like unlimited.
What do you do that with?
Well, it's the Webform analysis module. It just lets you generate charts, and the person who developed it, it's just very flexible. I'm emphasizing the migrate. If you're in D7 and need to move to D8, there is a migrate module. The problem with migration modules is the person who writes it, once they're done, they move on to their next project. So that module hasn't been touched in a year. But you need to be aware of it, and if you can help out, that'd be great. There's the composite tools module, which just allows you to find reusable composite elements. If you're building a large bunch of forms and you want a series of reusable elements, it's helpful. It puts it in one place, and then it propagates to all your forms. If you're doing a lot of stuff with email, I just recommend the mail log module. When you turn it on, it just logs all your emails and doesn't send them out. It's really good best practice for any dev server. And this is kind of my statement about the Webform module. The Webform module without Drupal's ecosystem, it's just another form builder. There's nothing special to it. But when you take this module and you combine it with Drupal's contributed modules and themes, it just enters an entirely different ballgame. And this is where I get to use my little pointer. So this is Maestro. This is a quick demo because they showed it to me a month ago and I was blown away because I didn't expect anyone to do something like this. It's a business workflow system. It's important to say, like, we're doing workflow and core content moderation. That's where you have a node, someone comes in, edits, saves a draft, they review it and publish it. And there's actually a presentation about that later. This is business workflows. This is a whole different ballgame. This is like, let's say you're doing an insurance rate quote system where you have someone fill out. And what I love about this is that's the web form. So they have a handler, and someone fills out the form, and that request comes in for a rate quote and goes into this, manages the whole workflow where that request then gets sent out to underwriters through email. The underwriters log in, they fill out, they give their quote. It generates user accounts along the way, and it goes. It's amazing. What you, I mean, basically, it's unlimited. Like this is the to me, I just this called out this kind of. Drupal does provide ambitious solutions, but this is a great example for solving some enterprise problems. This is like if you need it, it's here. And listen, the power behind the web, all this stuff is the Drupal's community, the community's ability to provide contributor modules and core, because this is really extending core, the whole module, is the real power behind the Webform module. And yeah, I just like to call out, like this is the Drupal community. I got to update this because this is from Baltimore to get the new photo. And this is kind of my little spiel of, not should you contribute, but how can you contribute? And how can you contribute to the Webform module in Drupal? Well, there's the contribute section for that. And this is just an experimental thing I put in the module where it's a section to encourage people to join the Drupal community, become members of the Drupal Association. That's the parent organization that keeps Drupal.org running. The automated test on the Webform module relies on that infrastructure, and we wouldn't have it if the Drupal Association wasn't maintaining it. And then it ultimately says you should contribute something back to the Drupal community. And this is the UI in the module, and I actually changed this slide because this is just about communicating a message, and I kind of stepped back because I was going to have a demo. And at DrupalCon, Dries started talking about the evaluator experience, how we're talking to people. Like someone comes to Drupal, where do they start? How do they feel about it? Are they overwhelmed? And I just did a blog post about it. We've got to just say hi. You've got to keep it simple. You've got to talk to people and welcome them. And make sure it's really clear. And the homepage is great. It got redesigned in a direction to start speaking to personas. So if you're a developer, there's a starting point. But I want to just emphasize, we need to have a message. And I've kind of decided that we need to bring diversity and inclusion a little up front and say it to people. It stands out in the tech industry because we mean it and we're working to improve it. And it just says, I like the message because it says everyone's welcome. End of story. Whoever you are, accessible, old, young, it doesn't matter. And then we need to be like, how can we help you succeed? And then, yes, bring them into here's how you can get involved in this community. And it just changes the picture if we have very direct and simple messages in core. I'm pushing for it to be in core, something simple and direct. And I think once that starts happening, it'll propagate more through the communities. And so where can you get help and learn more? Well, there's more information about that. I have a site, jrockowitz.com. That's my blog. You can get me on Drupal.org or Twitter. I'm also on Slack. I'm kind of calling that out. There's documentation online. There's videos within the module, but you can get them on Drupal.org. Stack Exchange, I pay attention to Drupal answers and what questions people pose. And if you find a bug, file it. And in the community, I want to emphasize you should go look at the Drupal Association and become a member. It's $15 a year. And also look at Drupal Planet because that gives you it's an RSS feed with all the blogs being aggregated in one place. And the newsletter also is another way to get a beat on what's going on in the community. And are we done yet? We are. And Ralph says yes. And that was 50 minutes. So I got 10 minutes for questions.
Let me go back a couple slides.
Sure. Which one?
You're right there.
It's not hard to find me because I've gone out of my way to you type Webform and I've managed to get good it's getting good SEO from Drupal, and then I'm fortunate that webform.com is registered by Nate, who's the maintainer of D7, and that helps. Yeah, I uploaded them. A couple of things about the slides is they're attached to the Drupaldelphia page,
Okay.
and in the module I have videos in the module, and you go to the help section, you're going to get all the help videos and this present. It's important to say if the recording's not good, which I like Kevin, I think it'll probably be great, but I recorded it and uploaded it because I've just decided sometimes it's better if I have to practice, so I have a clean screencast of it. But it doesn't have your questions, so that helps. That's the missing piece of the screencast.
Jake, thank you. That was very helpful. Does it have revision ability that we can say and it automatically saves?
No, no, because web forms are config entities. It's like they're config entities. This is important. Ready? This is to lay it out. Web forms are config entities, so they're configuration files that you can are saved into the database, and you can deploy and take, and if they're in GitHub and you control it, you can get revisions, you can save record histories. That's the benefit of config management. Submissions are content entities. Right now, they don't have revisions turned on. In theory, they could be turned on. There is a logging functionality that will log every transaction on a submission. So you can use that to kind of maintain a history and a record of it. But it's not like, we're not trying to generate, I'm not trying to generate nodes, so I'm not trying to get into that content moderation workflow system. It's possible. It's important. They've designed workflow to be like that, so it's not just for nodes. So there might be something that way. Other questions?
So I'm looking on the Webform page at Drupal, so you have 1,245 commits over the last year or so. Thank you.
Hey.
And one of them 3 hours ago. But,
Hey.
whoa.
I don't even know what to do to something. Okay, let's.
It looks like the current form is pre-release.
Yeah, I've learned to appreciate that statement, which I don't like, is it's ready when it's ready. It's really hard in open source to make commitments to deadlines. I had intentions of having it ready by DrupalCon, but I keep pushing things off because things come up. Something that's come up personally is accessibility is an issue. I didn't pay too much attention to it, and there are accessibility issues that I want to resolve. And one of the problems with accessibility is that means I have to change markup, and then that will break people's sites, like some sites. So I'm trying, I mean, it's close. It's very important to say that it's stable in the sense of if you install it, your data's safe. If you run into a bug, yes, I will fix it immediately and roll a new release, but we're not losing data. Like my number one thing is we're not losing data. I mean, there's a ticket where I need people to review it because I'm trying to fix some conditional logic where if you conditionally hide a page, that data from that page should get deleted. It's the right behavior, but I haven't had enough review to make that one commit. It's like literally the only change in this RC phase where I'm like, that one's a big change. But it shouldn't lose anyone's data as long as it's tested. My guess is it's like it might fall into like September, especially with the accessibility, because I'm going to do a presentation at Design for Drupal on accessibility, set up a roadmap, and really try to fix it. I just feel like it's an issue in core. Like we need a checklist. Every element should have this. There should be a checklist that you go through and make sure it's accessible.
Yeah.
But that's a big commitment. Like that. Okay. Other questions? Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.